Good morning. We're here at Windsor Station in Montreal, and we are introducing this morning Miss Angela Naeth. It's a top 10 Ironman champion of the world in triathlon, and we're proud to introduce her as our brand ambassador for our biometric wearable device, Atalanta. We would like to have a small conversation this morning with her so that she let us know what drives her professionally and personally, and we will also let you know why we chose her as our ambassador, as our brand representative. And we will give an explanation of what Atalanta means. What brought you into Ironman?
Yeah, I could go on forever about it just because there's been a lot of years that I've done the sport, but I was always active as a child. I lived in northern British Columbia, and I just loved sports. So when I was in high school, I got a track scholarship to go to the University of Missouri, Columbia, and I was there for 5 years. And after college, I wanted to stay active, and I loved riding, I loved swimming. I heard about triathlon, but where I'm from, I didn't really get to experience it. So it wasn't until 2 years after getting my master's that I wanted to jump into triathlon. And I did my very first one. My mom and I traveled maybe 5 hours that day to go to this indoor triathlon, very old school. I didn't know anything. I didn't know where to put my stuff in transition. But I ended up doing that race, and I ended up winning it, and it just sparked this amazing interest in me, and I absolutely fell in love with the sport. And then from there, I just slowly built into different races, looked at different coaches. I eventually quit my job and really tried to make it as a professional. I got my professional license. You know, there's been ups and downs and what have you, but started doing Ironman itself, the longer distances, a few years ago, and that's definitely the discipline that's for me.
Amazing, really, really amazing. So let us know a little bit more about Angela, the person. What kind of a kid were you? What motivated you? What kind of curiosity drove your life?
That's a very big question. Yeah, I was a middle child, so I guess that comes with a lot of issues when you're a middle child, but I always was very in tune with people, and I liked the connection of people. I was still shy. I didn't like public speaking a lot. I eventually got over that a little bit, and I was always very, very hardworking and driven. I was a straight A student. I worked as a lifeguard when I was 15, and almost every hour of the day, I was very, very busy. So when we would go play, I would make games that would challenge us, and obviously very, very competitive. It's kind of in my nature, but part of it is just having fun outside. When I was growing up, I spent almost every hour of the day outside and, making forts, being in the woods, up in northern BC, it snows a lot in the winter, and we would constantly be outside, and having that connection with nature was something I really, really loved from a very young age. And once I got into running and more sports and, finding a mountain bike and just going out in the woods, it brought a connection to me that I truly loved. And I guess that's what I try to do in my life now is still have that connection with the outside world, and then also transfer that over to the connection with people. I found that the sport of triathlon is really a community. It's a community of people from all walks of life, and we're all doing this sport together, and it's a lifestyle, and it's something I just truly enjoy, and so, yeah.
Which 3 moments in your life, not yet talking about triathlon, marked you the most, and why?
I think, well, there's a few. So both of my parents have been through cancer, and when you have a family member that has been diagnosed with something like cancer, and you don't know a lot of the unknowns, it's a big deal, and it kind of changes your view on life. And those 2 moments definitely created not this like anxiety, but this idea that you really need to live. you need to do what you want to do and get all that you can out of your life. And another moment, it definitely has to do with health, is I was diagnosed with Lyme disease in March of this past year, and I was dealing with a lot of issues prior to the diagnosis, and I didn't know what it was. And so it was really difficult for me to figure out what was happening and to stay positive. And so I was very, very relentless in trying to find an answer. And throughout the medical system, you had to really be my own self-advocate. And that was a turning point in my life, even though it was quite recently, but it helped me realize how important it is that you have to be a self-advocate of yourself and of other people, and don't take no for an answer if you truly feel something inside you. And when your health is taken away or someone of your family members is taken away, it's one of the, if not the most important aspects of life is having health. You're not able to fulfill your dreams or aspirations or help others when you don't have your health. And so it really just made me realize that health is a key component. And then obviously I knew that, but when you have it stripped away a little bit, you kind of learn a little bit more about it. And also just living in the moment. I mean, anything can happen at any point. And I know it sounds cliche because we know that, but the true essence of it is I lived every moment of the day when I wasn't feeling well. And it truly just created this sincere gratefulness in me a lot more in terms of I'm able to do what I love in this life, and I want to help others do that. And so any type of way that I can help create just a little bit of spark or inspiration to get them out of bed and just get that health back, it's a key component.
Very good. Now let's turn a little bit into the professional aspect of triathlon, of Ironman. When you started triathlon, were you thinking about Ironman, or you had another goal? Did you just start triathlon, as you have already explained to us, on that competition that you traveled 5 hours with your mom? That's impressive. Kudos to your mom and to yourself for keeping at it. So how many years did you spend on the normal triathlon circuit? And then when did you transition to Ironman? And what took you to take that step to go hardcore? Because Ironman, let's face it, that's hardcore. Come on. First, you need to swim 4K. Then you cycle 180 kilometers to end up with a full marathon. And I must say that it's impressive. And all this, your last one in Kona was 8 hours, 57 minutes. Below 9 hours. So what made you first triathlon, professional, and then how did you make the transition to Ironman?
Yeah, so when I found triathlon after that first race, I really jumped into the internet and tried to figure out what I need to do and what I want to do. And my first thought is I want to make the Olympics for the Canadian team. And I don't come from a swim background, and the Olympic triathlon is very different than the Ironman triathlon. So I was in the middle of winter and living in Prince George, and it was very, very snowy and cold. And at the time, I was just really diving into triathlon. I said, well, I need to get a coach. I need to go somewhere warm to learn some stuff. So I looked on the internet, and I found a triathlon camp in California. So I headed to the camp, and right away I jumped in with a bunch of guys that were riding, and we ended up doing a century, which is a 100-mile bike ride prior to the camp starting. And the coach that was there at the time kind of shoved me off, saying, just take your time, because I was all new to everything. But in the end, it ended up being me and him at the very end. We dropped everybody else. And so I was determined when he said that to me, I'm going to prove him otherwise.
How old were you?
26.
Okay.
So at that time, we started talking, and he saw me throughout the camp, and he just said, you have some talent in this. Have you ever considered going pro? And I said, well, no, I have a full-time job as a physical therapist, and it just, I love the sport. He said, well, let's see if you can make it and if you would like me to coach you. And so we started this journey, and actually 3 months later, I did a half Ironman because he thought the longer times and the distances would be good for me. I ended up winning, and so I got my pro card really, really quick. And then from there, it was a matter of getting into Ironman was more experience related and building up the miles. I was so new to the sport, I knew nothing, and I would jump into these half Ironmans, and those were doable for me. when I thought of Ironman, I thought, oh wow, that's something I could never do. My body could never handle it. And over the years, I changed coaches, and I learned about my body and what I could do over time. And so I just really wanted to give it a go at a point. And so I jumped into my first one. It was Ironman Lake Tahoe, and I remember that one very, very distinctly, obviously because it was my first one. But it snowed the night before. And so it was very, very cold.
Okay.
So it's a very different experience. So the whole Ironman itself was like a survival day, basically. So I was always thinking about Ironman, but I always thought it was such a big opportunity that I wasn't able to do. I didn't know much about my body, but as I learned, I really wanted to get into one. And so I picked one that was more similar to my hometown, which is Ironman Lake Tahoe at the time. And I distinctly remember that one because it snowed the night before and it was extremely cold, and the whole day was more about survival.
Yeah.
But finishing that race really showed me that Ironman was where I need to be. It was, I love the challenge. I love the long distances. You have to go through such highs and lows, and it's really a mental game as well. And so since that race, I've done a number of Ironmans. I still do halves for training and racing. I love the half Ironman events, but it's truly something that I'm very passionate about and love.
When I started when I was 22, 23, I actually hurt myself because I didn't know the limits of my body. I didn't have anybody that could coach me or train me. Back in the day, there was only triathlon. So for those people that do not know, which are the different triathlons, the main branches, and what strengths do you see behind each branch?
Yeah, there's a number of ways you can do triathlon. So the Olympic route that everyone sees the Olympics on TV, it's an Olympic triathlon, and it consists of a 1.5 kilometer swim, a 40K bike, and a 10K run. And the biking itself, you can draft behind each other. So it's a big group of biking. That's the Olympic route. And there's those races are more for the elites and professionals that are going into the Olympics. You can find triathlons everywhere. They're absolutely everywhere. And there's that distance, but you're not able to draft on the bike. And that's where you can see like a local triathlon that you can go into and do that. And then
just for the lay person, could you say really quick what's drafting?
Yes. So drafting is when you are riding your bike right behind someone. So you're able to get a draft off them essentially, and so you can get into groups. And when you do the other triathlons that are non-drafting, you have to stay a certain distance so that you don't get that advantage. And those are the races that you see basically everywhere. Yeah. So you have the Olympic distance, and then along with that you have a sprint distance, which can range in the actual distance itself, but roughly it's 750 meter swim, a 20K bike, and a 5K run. And the good things about those is that's how I got into the sport. My first race was an Olympic distance, and you can really learn a lot. You can do these races almost every weekend because they're short. They create a really good community. It's super fun. So it's kind of the entry point for anyone that wants to get into triathlon, and it's also very challenging too. So you can, as someone who's getting into the sport and you have a full-time job, kids, family, and just so many other commitments, it's something that you can create into your life, I feel, and still have all those other commitments and be focused on them, and still have fun in triathlon. And from there, you have the half Ironman and the full Ironman. Now, Ironman is kind of is their own entity, and so they just call it Ironman. But basically a half Ironman is a 1.9 kilometer swim, a 56 mile bike, so I have to put that in, I think that's 90 kilometer, 90 kilometers of cycling, and then it's a half marathon, which is 13.1 kilometers, 21.2 or 21.1 kilometer run. And those are really, really great, and they're very, very challenging. There's a professional field for that as well, and there's a championship, and there's also age group championships. That's where I find you get a really mass variety of people, and it's a huge community in and of itself, and it's a big challenge. It's a distance that can be done anywhere from the pros or doing it like 3:45 for the males, all the way up to I believe the cutoff is 8 or 9 hours.
Yeah.
So you can really get into triathlon and do do halves and challenge yourself. From there, you then could go into the full distance. Now there's Ironman branded events, and there's also full triathlon events. And so they're done by other companies like Challenge and other racers, races themselves. And so that's basically twice the distance of a half, which is what we've been talking a little bit about. And so again, it's a 180 kilometer bike, it's a 4.2 kilometer swim, and a marathon at the end. And the advantage to that one is, the reason I love it so much is because it's truly a full day, and you have to mentally, physically, spiritually be there and 100% on the entire time. And it's not to say you won't in the other races, but I just find the distance a challenge in and of itself. And so, you know, everyone wants to do the most epic thing all the time, and so sometimes the key is to always go long, but then once you do it once, it's kind of like a check off the bucket list for some, and some really get into it. And so that's where I love, and I love the halves as well. It's very similar.
So, as we know, you're coming back from Lyme.
Yes.
Could you please explain to us, when did you realize that you were not at the top of your game?
Yeah, it was about last year around this time. I went and did a race overseas. I managed to do quite well at the race, but at the end of the race, my right leg was really, really sore. It was the end of my season, and we kind of chalked it off to, okay, you had a long season, and let's just take some time off and see if it'll heal. Well, I took the 2 weeks off, went home for Christmas, and it just wasn't getting better. And I started getting more and more symptoms from there. My legs would burn, and I was really, really tired. I was depressed. I had really high anxiety at times. I wasn't sleeping well. I was very intolerant to cold or any changes of temperature. And there were just little things and subtle things. I'd get headaches, and you know, when you look at it all separately, it's just like, oh well, that's maybe because you're dehydrated, or you know, you didn't recover well that night. But when you put it all together, it created a person that, like, I changed. I felt so sick. I felt not healthy. And the real issue for me is because I was trying to train some more, my legs and muscles would just ache and burn, and at points I thought I broke my hips. I would get MRIs, I'd go to the doctors, I'd get blood tests, and I was the epitome of health on paper, but inside I was really, really hurting. And you know, there were times when doctors would say, you know, maybe it's all in your head, and it got me thinking, like, well, maybe it is, you know, but I knew something was wrong. I was changing as a person. And it wasn't until after I went to a few doctors and got misdiagnosed in terms of a sense they thought it was a virus that I had to take a year off. I kept pushing through, and I think that just is a little bit about I'm stubborn, and I also I think everyone knows deep inside their heart what's right and what's wrong, and I knew something was wrong. I was not me. And so I just kept pushing, and I went to, a friend of mine is a doctor, and he suggested, after listening to me, you know, I think you might have Lyme, and I didn't know what that was, and so I started reading all about it. And but he sent me to his friend who's a Lyme specialist, and he said, you know, I'm 99% certain you have Lyme, but let's do some tests. And I told him, well, I did some standard testing and it came back negative. He's like, well, sometimes you get a lot of false negatives. And so Lyme disease itself is basically a bacteria infection, and it comes from ticks, it comes from little nymphs that you can hardly see. And these ticks actually carry other bacteria and infections with them, along with Lyme. So there's a number of infections you can get from them. So the standard testing doesn't really test for all those types of co-infections or even the full strands of Lyme. So we did some special testing, and I came back positive with 2 co-infections and Lyme infection. At that time, you know, it was truly, I was grateful for the diagnosis because it gave me something to say, okay, let's fight, you know. Now I know it's real, and I know that I can I can fight this.
The fighter.
Yes, it came full force. So it was, from there, it was definitely a battle since December. When I got diagnosed, it was probably around April. I did another race in Mexico, and after that race, I couldn't walk, and I literally had to get support with a wheelchair and hold on to walls in the airport because I couldn't hold myself up. And you know, going from running to literally not being able to walk was a huge red flag. So having the diagnosis and going through that, it was just it was a series of antibiotic treatment, and you know, there's a lot of different Lyme protocols, and depending on your infection, how you treat them. And sometimes there's a standard way to treat Lyme, but not the co-infections. And so it's really, as you were saying, it's multi-vector, and it took, you know, let's do this route for a way, let's see how you get off the medications and go from there. And so it took probably 5 months to really kind of get things under control, where I felt I had my body back. When I started taking the treatment protocols, it came to a point in my body, and this is how I had to explain it to people, is I could swim, I could bike, I could run, but I wasn't running. It was if you can imagine 20-pound weights on your feet, and then trying to lift your legs, okay, and trying to run, but then not knowing where your feet are landing. You're landing on pillows, so you have no awareness or feedback to where your feet are. So when I started to run or try to run, I could barely go faster than a walk, and I couldn't. I had to look at the ground and watch my feet plant, because I felt I was going to fall, and it was because it was hitting my nervous system, the infection, and it was multi-level, and it took a while. And so I started training on an Alter G, which is a treadmill that kind of takes away some body weight. And that allowed me to at least not think about where my feet were landing. And, you know, I was so determined, and I mean, it's just my character, I guess, but I love triathlon, and that was my career, and it is my career, that I could never just stop it. And it actually, I truly believe it helped me get healthier. My focus was to do what I could each day and to continue the path and keep moving forward. When I got diagnosed, my boyfriend, those were the words he said. He said, you know what, we're just gonna keep moving forward. And that was kind of my motto throughout the whole process, is, you know, that's all you can do at any time, is to keep moving forward. And those 3 simple words you can use in so many aspects in life and in racing, and it's what determined this whole year. You know, I sat myself down one night and I was thinking, just like, well, what do I want? Like, well, what can I do here? And I wanted to get to Kona. I wanted to get to Ironman World Championships, and I remember having the discussion with Tim, who became my coach, because we had to work one-on-one all the time. He basically sat me down, sat with me, and he said, what do you want to do this year? And I said, I want to get to Kona. And he said, okay. And you know, at that time I could barely walk. We're like, we're going to just take it day by day. We're going to go to race and see what happens, and we're going to get to Kona. And so it was actually a goal that really helped the focus and the forward health and the momentum. And when I came public with it, I was inundated with so much support from the community and people that I've touched or connected with, had homestays with, friends, and it was amazing. It really drove that center and awareness of how close-knit and how special triathlon is. And you know, it was super supportive looking back, and it just made me want to really showcase that you can get healthy and strong again from Lyme, and really be an advocate for Lyme awareness, because it was something that I didn't even have on my radar, and it affects so many. And there's been many people, actually, even in the triathlon community, outside the triathlon community, that I've said, hey, you need to get this test, or you know, if you have these weird, odd symptoms, and I've been able to connect with other people and hopefully help them, because it was a time in my life that was, you know, everything went out the window. I had no idea what was going on.
That must have been truly scary at the moment, but then you fought back.
Yes.
You came back with a bang. And people that didn't know the strength of Angela Naeth just learned how strong you can be, how determined, how dead set in your goals. That's probably why we think that this 2019 season that's about to start, it's going to be one of the most amazing seasons for you. We already know a little bit of Angela's life, her brush with cancer, I myself lost my father to cancer too, and that taught me wanting to help my mother out in her own problems. She actually threatened me, if you drop out of college just to get a job and help me, don't you dare. Don't you dare, because that's the only gift that I can give you. So what I gave back in return to her was pretty much like, okay, you don't want me to take a job. I was already a straight A student at my university. I applied for a scholarship. And happily, I got that scholarship. That's the moment when I, for one reason or the other, I found triathlon. I was in university. It was a relatively young age, 21. I was going into 22. And I met this wonderful guy that he seemed happy all the time. Happy all the time, and he invited me because I took him into swimming in order to get out of that mental state of distress that I had when my father passed away. And he told me, well, you swim well. Do you want to do something different? And I told him, yeah, why not? And he took me to this lake in Mexico that's called Valle de Bravo. And he told me, we're going to do something crazy. First, we're going to swim. Then you're going to jump into a bike. And then you're going to run. And I didn't know. He didn't tell me the distance. He didn't tell me you're going to do this long. Back in that day, I was swimming around 4,000 K in about 30 minutes. So I was fast. I was. Right now, it's a different story. But anyway, I went into this lake with this guy. I remember I was so grossly unprepared. My bike was a steel bike. It was a road bike, but still. And my tennis shoes were, I don't know, the ones, they were not even for marathon running or anything. So I went through all this competition, and surprisingly, I was able to finish it. I was exhausted, not even in the top half. But when I finished it, I was like, what was this all about? I didn't know. It was like, oh my God. But I felt alive. So slowly my life veered into what became triathlon and a little bit of an obsession for me, until I got my surgery on the knee, because I didn't take care of myself. So I got an arthroscopy because I got overstretched ACLs from improper footwear that I was using in order to run, torn down meniscus because my gait was not well controlled. I didn't have guidance, but I was having fun. And 20 years down the road, after I finished my last contract with a company, with a pharmaceutical device manufacturer, I finished that contract and I said, okay, it never left me. I had already been watching Ironman constantly, and I was just wishing that I could be there. So I started swimming, and I thought, okay, I'm going to find a wearable device, because I know that now technology is very advanced. To my surprise, nothing on the market. None of them had something that would actually address my love for swimming, and then you go biking, and then you go running in one stretch, without having the issues of connectivity, losing data, not being that precise, because as I already expressed, I am an industrial designer, and I have a specialty on ergonomics, human factors, the body, the human body. And then I went into a master's for material science for body implants. And I was surprised. I said, why are they using 70, 80-year-old technology for modern equipment and sports monitoring? So I said, okay, I have two options. One, I wait for somebody else to invent it, or why not? Come on, you have the tools. go and do it. So I took myself seriously, and at the same time I was looking for a new job, but very quickly the development of the device took over. I started looking for people to work with. I started to have quotes, I started putting my own money into purchasing electronics that I had not done in many years. Started to assemble something, and at the end of the day, I ended up with this electronic assembly that I took to several companies for a quote. And I was very lucky because I remember in my last position in the pharmaceutical company, I was working with what I consider a genius in mechatronics. He's completely a genius. He was not only my supplier, but he became my friend. And I remember that once he walked into my office, knocked into the door, and told me, "Can I come in?" I said, "Yes, absolutely." He closed the door. "Do you mind?" "No." And his first question was, "What the hell are you doing here?" And I said, "Well, here I work and I do the equipment." "They don't value your work. They don't value your ideas. Why don't you go out and start something?" That went a little bit into the cold, because several months later, I was already with this kind of Frankenstein of sensors, and he was actually the last company that I approached to have a quote on the electronics. And I remember clearly that he told me, "Okay, I'm gonna call you in a week after I make the analysis." Well, he didn't call me in a week, he called me 2 or 3 days later. He told me, "Can you come here?" I said, "Yeah, no worries. I have two ways to work with you. One, in which, yes, I quote you and then we manufacture later, etc. Or, I'm very interested in your project and I would love to partner with you. Which is your idea?" And I was surprised. I said, "Okay," because I respected him very much for everything that he did, the quality, the ideas that he brought. He said, "If I team up with somebody like him, chances that this device is going to fly are going to multiply 10, 20, 100 times." So 5 months down the road, we already had the first iterations of the product. We were incorporating our company in 2016, and we were looking for somebody to do the application. I approached an old friend with whom I had already been teaching in college level. So we proposed to her, "You know what, can you do an application design for us? UI, UX, and if you can, website." She started working on the device, on everything, several iterations, and 3 months later, she became so interested that, she just gave us her quote, but we told her, "Well, right now we don't have that much money. I don't know if we can work on a certain way," and she said, "I want to be a part of this too." So that's the way that 1 year into our process, we incorporated Marie. So it was Nasser, then Marie, and that's the way that precisely the spirit of Atalanta was born. And behind Atalanta comes a story of resiliency, comes a story of strength. And why we chose the name Atalanta? Who is Atalanta? Atalanta is the only Greek heroine. You hear about Hector, you hear about Achilles, you hear about Ulysses, Perseus, you hear about all these male characters. But seldomly, in this man-dominated world, you get to hear about the only Greek heroine that actually didn't want to marry, that was a huntress with great athletic prowess, relentless, that was really poised and full of courage. And we said, okay, Atalanta is a good name for this device that can take anything and will deliver very precise results. Why do we make an insistence on precision at Atalanta? Because Atalanta's weapon of choice. Bow and arrow.
Oh, bow and arrow.
Bow and arrow, and they're very precise, targeted, but she's resilient too. She's very determined. So when I learned about the existence of somebody that was actually super resilient, a warrior, on my point of view, taking into account what Ironman is, because I have done triathlon, so I know what it comes behind. Your story behind it, you never quit, ever. You were there all the time. Instead, there's no better ambassador for the brand, for the device, than Angela Naeth. So we decided to start kind of a relationship. How you felt. For me, it's very important that we have a personal rapport.
Yep.
That is nice, because my philosophy, it rolls down into humans, into community. You're not a brand, you're a person. And that person entails a spirit. And that spirit entails how you move in life. Why you move in life like you move. So now that you know a little bit about the story of Atalanta as the only Greek heroine, how does it feel to have received that kind of anointment? Because it's, to a certain point, it's an anointment. It's a recognition to that strength, to that determination, to that love for life, to that relentlessness. How do you feel about that?
Well, I've heard the stories of why Atlanta, like the story behind it of what you just wrote, but I never knew the connection of me. And so this is the first time hearing it. So a little overwhelmed, but extremely honored. I mean, and grateful. It's a wonderful feeling. You know, it definitely showcases what triathlon means to me, and just I think that's how we're able to converse so well. Is you really embody what I want out of any partnership. And you know, having the focus on health and relentlessness and triathlon and community. I mean, it's just all encompassing, and so thank you.
It is my pleasure. I kept it like this because it's kind of what I consider a gift. For me, it's the immaterial gift is more valuable than any material gift. You can give the most expensive car, the most expensive watch in the world with an empty spirit, and it will account to nothing. You can give not a promise but a fact, an experience, and for me that experience, that spirit is what you will be taking when we move on from this world, because we will move on. So for me, the most valuable gift is the one that you can give to somebody to give motivation. Help them explode and open into the world and have, because at Body Mechanics we have, our motto is technology for a better human experience. So for me, using this as a means to help you explode into the world, become even better, more motivated and happier. If I'm achieving that, I have already been successful.
I couldn't agree more.
And that's why I kept it up until this moment on the wraps, so that you could receive it and see that smile, that honored, the same way that you feel honored, I was and I am honored to have you as our Atalanta brand ambassador. That it's not just an ambassador, it's you entail, you incarnate the spirit of what we want to transmit.
That's amazing.
So that's in this way. I would like to welcome you in the name of Body Mechanics, personally, and in the name of my beautiful team. It's a great team of professionals into the Body Mechanics family, because we do not consider you just as somebody external. We consider you right now as part of our company, as part of our family. And we are looking forward to sharing this trip that we have been sharing at the same time, and giving you something that will help you move forward.
Well, thank you. I know I'm actually very, very excited. Again, honored, and just the short time we've spent together, and the whole crew. It's been phenomenal. But I got to use the device last night and this morning, and it's very intriguing, and I'm very excited to see what we can do together and where it'll lead to.
Thank you very much, Angela. It's been a pleasure having you this morning.
Thank you.
I seriously feel so excited, and I feel the synergy between us being really dynamic. Welcome to Montreal. Welcome to Body Mechanics, and thank you very much.
Thank you, very.